let's get into some of the baseball stuff. We're just going to kind of generally throw okay, last night, Frank, I said to you, did you see the Sir Anthony Dominguez news? And then you told me, look, when you were down there, you had said to somebody sitting next to you, like, not surprised if this guy has Tommy John. Like, so this isn't a big surprise to you that if there is a season, Sir Anthony Dominguez most likely will not be a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And actually, the conversation I was having, that goes back to his rookie year. I just didn't. This is not a scientific answer, but I just didn't have a good feeling about the way his elbow looked when I saw him pitch. He was amazing, of course, when it came up. He surprised everybody and made the Phillies that year. It came up as a rookie, made an impact as a rookie right away. But man, I just thought, man, that strain. When you throw that fast, you put tremendous strain, of course, onto the elbow, and so that was something that worried me back then. And then now, all of a sudden, what do you know? He's got some elbow issues, and unfortunately, the usual remedy to these types of things is Tommy John surgery, and it sounds like that's what the doctors recommended.
Frank, now obviously everything's on hiatus here, but how are you viewing Sir Anthony Dominguez's role if hypothetically things were going to quickly become somewhat back to normal, and then how does it impact the bullpen whenever they do, go back to playing ball?
I didn't really think that they could count on him this year. Like the way that the injury worked out last year, there have been some other paths to people that have had a UCL strain in the major leagues, and I think they tried those procedures first. They don't always work, but I think if you're the Phillies and you're towards the end of last season, you say, all right, we try those methods first, and if they work, great. You have Sir Anthony Dominguez next year. And if they don't work, it's basically like saying, well, we're not going to have them anyway. So I totally get that they tried the other options first. And it seems like from what we're hearing that this is probably where it needs to go. They probably need to have that Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, that's, you said you weren't really counting on them, but what about them? Were they counting on them?
I think they were hopeful. Now, we all kind of said that there was not a really good reliever market this offseason, and I think if there were options like there had been in other years, they would have spent the money. But when you're talking Blake Trinan, who's a big question mark, signing for $10 million, and that drove Dylan Betances, who was hurt last year, his price over $10 million. There really wasn't a lot the Phillies could do in terms of adding a reliever, and that's why those two players got way overpaid. I think the Phillies were probably in on both of them, it sounds like, from everything I hear. But at some point, they just said that's quite the commitment for a question mark. So I think that the Phillies were just kind of hamstrung by the market as it was, and that kind of led them to try to be strategic and try to add the non-roster invitee veterans like Anthony Swarzak and Bud Norris and then Drew Storen and Francisco Liriano, who I think could be a good bet. So I think they went that route, just trying to minimize their risk and give them as many options as possible.
Something that Gil brought up a year ago that Jeff Mosher stole and took credit of his own was Jake Arrieta.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed you didn't catch it to say, hey, Mike Gill thought of that.
Sorry to call you out, Frank, and not defending Gil there. But
in my defense, I actually really funny story, since I guess we have a moment now. When I first heard that idea floated by me, I was at a convention down in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had gone out onto a balcony to take the phone call to do my bit, and I had gotten locked out of the convention center in downtown Raleigh. So that was when I heard that the first time. I still remember that, because then I was also kind of semi-panicking, wondering how I'm going to get back in, because it also started to thunderstorm.
So you were a little distracted.
Yeah, I was a little distracted that day.
Which would make you feel even more like, wait a second, because you said in the podcast, hey, I've never actually heard that before. That's a good idea.
And then it did dawn on me again. No, I never said it was a good idea, but let's set that straight at least. But then eventually, upon reflection, I remembered where I did hear it, and I still remember that was the day that I got locked out on the balcony in a thunderstorm while trying to do my bit.
That's great. So,
but I think they need Arrieta as a starter more than anything. I mean, if Arrieta is going to work this year, he's probably got to be a starter. You got to hope to get at least, especially a truncated season, you really need a full season. What will be a full season out of Arrieta next year, out of the starting rotation. I think that's more important at this point.
Now with the fifth starter battle, that's kind of what I was going to tie into that question as well. What was the update there? Because you had Pivetta, you had Velasquez, you had Ranger Suarez, who's most likely the bullpen guy. But I actually float around the idea of I didn't hate Suarez potentially being the fifth guy. Does that injury impact anything at all? And if not, how does that fifth role or spot play out to you?
Well, maybe Mike remembers, but Suarez was my pick even before camp really broke, before the spring game started.
No, I don't think I do remember. That's a bad idea.
So
yeah, we can't recall.
Yeah, so I thought he had, at least in the body of work we saw, I thought he was the guy, Suarez. But what's the reality of this new season as it might develop, especially the later they start? Doubleheaders are on the table, so you might need 6 starters, and it sounds like baseball is willing to expand the rosters to allow for some of that help, since the doubleheaders will probably become commonplace. So you might have a situation where they all make the rotation, unfortunately, just because they need bodies.
When you say doubleheaders could become, is that like multiple times a week or once a week, or what do you mean when you say they could become commonplace? I know it's not, nothing's out there, but how do you envision, like, every team will have to play 1 a week or 2 a week, or how do you see that?
Based upon what the players have been looking for in recent years, I see the players wanting to make sure they still have their days off. All right. And the way to do that is to have a doubleheader. I don't think they would go too berserk. As a rule, I don't think they like having doubleheaders, but they want their days off. So I could see them making sure every week has 7 games because they really need to. I don't know that they would do multiple a week if they can help it, but we have to remember too, as much as the players don't like the doubleheaders, they also like their careers. And at the end of the day, there are people who are fighting for their place in the record books and for their legacy. What they do in their career leads to what they do in their next career, because most players are not in the major leagues that long. So I think for the players, what you might want to do is say, okay, well, we'll suck it up. We'll do some of these. And that way you don't have a situation where you're Dale Murphy and you have 398 home. How many home runs does he had? 398 or something like that. Dale Murphy was really, really close to the 400 home run mark. And, imagine if you were one of those fringe type players where you're just on the cusp of perhaps Hall of Fame, and you're not able to get in because of a truncated season. I think that's going to be really tough.
Yeah. What about the whole service time? And it affects the Phillies big time here. I mean, with JT Realmuto, I guess all the players agreed to this, right?
So what the players really wanted to make sure they preserved was their service time, because, that's the best case scenario here. What the players did agree to do is they're going to be basically paid a prorated amount of the season in their salaries. So while Major League Baseball did put aside $170 million, which is going to be sort of like some fronted money for players right now while they're sitting out, if that continues, they're going to lose money. If you get past May 1st and there's still no baseball, which is likely at this point. So the service time thing was a big issue for the players because if I'm not going to make my money now, I don't want to hurt myself next year. So that means whether they play or not, Didi Gregorius and JT Realmuto are going to be free agents at the end of the year.
So I brought up, Ranger Suarez. And I think he's a good example of this service time because he was brought up in 2019 in the first week of June. So let's just say the Phillies and the MLB only play 90 games. I don't know, 100 games. Would it be financially beneficial for the Phillies to, move Ranger up into an every 5th day role and move someone else down because of his service time in 2019 in this new agreement?
Well, the service time it sounds like they're doing everything to scale. So, like, normally if usually it's around the beginning of May, you get to that point, then the player doesn't have a full year. So I think they would just kind of scale those according to whatever's left. So that they may not need to play the numbers games, but or if they want to hold back someone like Alec Boehm and Spencer Howard in the minor leagues a little bit, or at least get them to get their feet wet at AAA, because neither player has really played at AAA yet. So you'll probably still have to wait out a scaled down version of that service time that you would otherwise wait, but it would be to scale. So someone like Suarez, I think they're in a good spot anyway. This would be year 1 of 6 basically, because his major league service time was minimal in 18 and was not long enough in 19. So that could be, I think they're okay with somebody like him.
Frank Klose is with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. The Powder Blue podcast, they'll talk deeper about a lot of these topics tonight. But when do you kind of feel like they're in trouble to get this season in? Because there has been talk, Scott Boras threw out the idea about possibly playing on Christmas Day. What do you see about a scenario like that? With neutral sites and indoor parks?
Yeah, one interesting thing to look at is what's going on in Korea right now. So KBO, right now they're trying to get life back to normal in South Korea at this point. So,
did you know 38 million people live in South Korea?
A lot of people. So they're trying to get life back to normal. That is not an
accurate number, by the way. It's not
I don't
even
close. Know. I was too busy thinking about my point to catch what number you actually said. But what's happening there is that the players are playing scrimmages against their own team with no fans. That's kind of the baseball that people have right now, and it sounds like the fans are eating it up because that's all they have. So I caught a national show with Dan Straley, who pitched for the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs last year, and you might remember him for the Marlins. But Straley is with the KBO this year, and he was kind of reflecting on how odd it is that they're playing at empty stadiums against each other, and that's the way that they're trying to do their keep the what's left of the virus contained. Now, it sounds like, and there was actually a really interesting website that it's COVID19.healthdata.org, and if you look at the projections of this, and this is, by the way, I believe an official, a pretty reliable site. Again, COVID19.healthdata.org. You can look state by state and see where they project the virus to be. And right now, we see New York State's kind of in the middle of all this, and we're not far behind in South Jersey and Philly. But the curve is a lot different depending where you go in the country. So what you're seeing here is, according to this data, New York State or New Jersey as a whole, you're looking at this kind of being kind of through the cycle of it by the first week of May. And if you look at the data in New York, very, very similar. You look at Pennsylvania, a little bit behind that, but not by much. But then if you look at a state like Florida, this might drag out all the way till July 1st, before it's all kind of said and done. So I think the idea is, if there are places that they deem safe to play, if testing's at a point where, you can make sure that everybody that's going in to play the games is not going to be affected, then maybe you might shift things around. If there's still active cases in let's say the Miami area, and Pennsylvania looks fine, maybe you'll play some games in Texas just because it's an open stadium.
So do you think that they would have to play another round of spring training games, like a couple of more weeks, maybe not a full month, but wasn't that something that one of the teams, maybe the Blue Jays team president or somebody has thrown out, that, hey, we're going to have to play spring training games again to get ready for this?
Yeah, so the plan is, as it's constituted, they are going back to their camps. And
so they can go to Clearwater.
One thing I did learn talking to Phillies personnel was that the lockers in Clearwater are still filled with the players' stuff. Now, they might have grabbed their glove, they might have grabbed their bat that they want to go warm up with at home, but they left the lockers intact. So the plan is they're going back. And you need to have some sort of play to make sure that people are in the right shape to go play. I mean, that's the thing about spring training. The idea behind it to begin with was you get in shape to play the games, and you don't want to you don't want to come play your real games and have people not be stretched out enough and then they get hurt. So it sounds like the compromise for that was you'll have a limited camp. You'll try to get them back in shape, but then you'll have an additional players on the roster to try to relieve that burden as people sort of get stretched out, to use what they usually use the term for, like a starting pitcher who builds up the number of pitches over the camp. Now that obviously got interrupted. So
what do you think about baseball benefiting from all of this? Now, I'm not saying this is a good thing that happened. I'm not implying anything, but there's talks and there's critics, and I've been in that crowd at times of baseball season's too long, people that aren't the traditional baseball fan, and maybe more doubleheaders and a shortened season with a different timeline could benefit the sport. Do you see, or have you thought of any ideas that maybe back that theory up?
Kind of hard to say. I feel like they'd have a really hard time if they're going to scale back at all. Maybe 154 instead of 162. Like go with the original number of games. I don't think the MLB Players Association is going to like that too much again, because often the numbers determine the person's place in history, and that they want to be recognized for their abilities over the long haul. So I almost wonder if that would be the most they would truncate it. Now, they were talking about extra rounds of the playoffs even before this. You might have to go to 154 to try to accommodate these extra playoff teams and extra series and three-game wild card playoffs like they're talking about. So kind of anything's on the table right now. They might have that expanded postseason this year. So I think this will definitely at least be a case study that people can reflect on, if nothing else. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts to truncate the season permanently going forward after this at this point, but who knows? I mean, data is data. So if it suggests that things would be better, then fine. I don't know if you want to go all the way to December like Scott Boras is saying. I mean, think about Scott Boras. He wants his clients to get paid, so he wants them to play the full course of games whenever possible. But yeah,
I don't know if that was something that he was proposing for this season, or like if he was saying, like, this should be our new thing is at Christmas Day. And I'm thinking, why would baseball want to try to go up against the NBA on Christmas Day?
Yeah, I don't particularly like that. I mean, I think the way that the seasons are laid out now, it gives each sport kind of their place as it is, and the overlaps of MLB and NFL, at least they usually don't try to play playoff games on Monday night and stuff like that. When there would be big conflicts in terms of the numbers. So I think it'd be really hard because
Frank,
the one thing you got to figure out too is the other two sports have to come back too. So
right, and that's where baseball could be. If basketball comes back with their playoffs in the middle of the summer and they're playing playoff basketball in July, August, and September, when baseball is playing, like, they're already trying to find their spot. They own the summer per se, but if that happens, you got the possibility of going up against NBA and football.
Yeah, one thing that this could do is, maybe next year they have to rethink all the dates and all the sports. I mean, if you're pushed back far enough, you need that off season. You need to let people breathe. You need to let the players have their body recover. I would think that maybe they could work something out where if this year they went really deep, that maybe they at least a little bit gave you a few extra weeks next year before they get started again, just to try to give that off season that's due to play. I mean, especially baseball, because you're talking a six month season and then spring training. So,
for instance, basketball wants to there has been some owners proposing to start the season on Christmas Day. They said, why are we competing against the NFL in October and November and December? We got games on and nobody cares about us until Christmas anyway. Why are we competing? So I don't know if baseball doesn't really say, like, hey, why are we starting in April? Heck, they moved their season up to March.
Yeah, I thought that was even a little early personally, but yeah, I mean the reason why they moved it up a little bit was for the players. The players just wanted more days off. I mean that was the reason for that. So they especially in the non-steroid area, the steroids used to help the bodies recover faster, but you don't do that anymore. So But so it was kind of a new thing that the baseball season was starting this early. This would have been the earliest Phillies opening day ever, of course. So just to kind of tell you that they really did kind of move it back. But, after this is all settled, I mean, I think people are, especially within baseball, but people seem open-minded and trying to find ways to try to help everybody have this do as little damage as possible in the long run. So they might consider stuff like that.
All right, more tonight in the Powder Blue podcast. The guys will have plenty of baseball for you from 6 to 7. You can listen to that right here on 97.3 ESPN. Frank Klose, Hunter Brody, Jeff Mosher, 6 to 7 tonight. Good baseball conversation, good music conversation, and, remember, it was my idea about Arrieta.
I won't forget now. I promise you that.
All right, Frank. Thanks, pal.
Have a good one, guys.
All right,
Thanks,
Frank
Frank.
Klose, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.